Something happened on March 15th, 2026 that should not be possible according to everything scientists understand about Earth. What you are about to hear isn't speculation or science fiction. It comes from satellite observations, ocean sensors, and measurements recorded by multiple international space agencies. At exactly 8 UTC this morning, global sea levels didn't slowly rise the way they usually do. They didn't creep upward by a millimeter or two over weeks or months. Instead, the oceans of the world surged upward by nearly 6 inches in a single day. Pause for a moment and consider what that means. To raise sea levels by 6 inches across the entire planet, roughly 50,000 cubic kilometers of water must suddenly appear in the oceans. That amount of water is so enormous that it is comparable to the entire state of Florida suddenly liquefying and pouring into the Atlantic Ocean in less than 24 hours. According to NASA's JASON 3 satellite, that is exactly what the sensors recorded. Europe's Sentinel-6 satellite confirmed the same data independently. The measurements match perfectly. The oceans truly rose. At first, many scientists assumed a measurement error. Satellite instruments sometimes drift out of calibration, and unusual readings often turn out to be glitches. But when researchers began comparing the satellite data with tidal gauges around the world, the same pattern appeared everywhere. Tokyo recorded it, New York recorded it, Amsterdam recorded it. The water level had risen globally, and the numbers were identical. The source of that change is what has left researchers stunned. It wasn't a slow effect of climate change. It wasn't a natural collapse of an ice shelf. Instead, the origin appears connected to a mysterious object known as 3I Atlas. At 4:15 UTC, the Deep Space Network detected a sudden and extremely concentrated burst of energy coming from this object, which has been holding a fixed position above the Weddell Sea in Antarctica. The signal wasn't a communication transmission. Instead, it looked like a directed energy release, an injection of power so precise that it struck a specific region of the Antarctic ice sheet. Within minutes, satellite sensors began detecting something extraordinary. A large portion of the Thwaites Glacier shelf appeared to liquefy almost instantly. Imagine what scientists normally see in Antarctica. The entire continent appears in shades of blue and white in thermal imaging, reflecting temperatures close to minus 30 degrees Celsius. But for 12 minutes this morning, the thermal sensors on the Landsat 9 satellite suddenly turned red. Then they maxed out entirely. The recorded surface temperature in the targeted zone briefly reached nearly 800 degrees Celsius. Ice cannot naturally heat to that temperature, not in Antarctica, not anywhere on Earth. At first, many researchers assumed the sensor had malfunctioned, but the tidal gauges kept confirming the same reality. The oceans were rising. Something had injected an unimaginable amount of energy directly into the Antarctic ice sheet. The numbers required to explain this event are almost impossible to comprehend. The energy involved would need to be delivered with extreme precision, concentrated into a beam less than 3 kilometers wide. It would also require a power output far beyond anything humanity can generate. And the most unsettling part of all is this. After exactly 12 minutes, the energy stopped. The beam switched off, which suggests one chilling possibility. Whatever caused this event wasn't an accident. It was controlled. And if it was controlled, then the next question becomes unavoidable. Was this event merely a demonstration of capability, or was it the beginning of something much larger? To understand how serious this situation really is, we have to examine the raw data coming from Antarctica itself. Normally, when an ice shelf breaks apart, the process is mechanical. Gravity pulls on the ice, cracks slowly form, and eventually large blocks collapse into the ocean. The event is loud, chaotic, and cold. What happened at 4:15 UTC today followed none of those rules. Instead, the change was silent. NASA's ICESat-2 satellite happened to be passing over the eastern Antarctic shelf at the exact moment the event occurred. This spacecraft uses an extremely precise laser altimeter system capable of measuring the height of the ice sheet with millimeter accuracy. During a single pass that lasts less than 90 seconds, the instrument recorded something extraordinary. The surface elevation of the ice suddenly dropped by 400 meters. For that to occur, the massive structure beneath the surface had to disappear almost instantly. Ice does not compress under its own weight like that. It does not collapse smoothly downward without producing fractures or seismic activity. The only way the surface could drop that dramatically in such a short time is if the ice beneath it suddenly changed state. In other words, solid ice became liquid water almost instantly. That kind of transformation requires an enormous injection of energy. But scientists never rely on a single measurement. They look for confirmation from independent systems. Today, that confirmation arrived from 3 different sources. First, ICESat-2 recorded the sudden loss of elevation. The volume of missing ice corresponds almost exactly to 50,000 cubic kilometers. Second, the European Space Agency's Cryosat-2 satellite detected something rising from the same coordinates. Using synthetic aperture radar, it observed a huge plume of superheated water vapor pushing upward into the stratosphere. Then came the most disturbing observation of all. Japan's ALOS-4 satellite, equipped with powerful radar capable of seeing through thick clouds of steam, scanned the region directly. What its instruments detected shocked the research teams analyzing the data. In the center of the Antarctic ice shelf was a perfectly circular region of open water. The diameter of that circle measured exactly 88 kilometers. Nature rarely produces shapes with perfect geometric precision. Glaciers crack irregularly, ice shelves break unevenly, but this formation looked engineered. The circle had sharp, symmetrical boundaries, as if a giant invisible tool had carved it directly into the ice. When scientists began calculating the amount of energy needed to melt that volume of ice, the numbers became staggering. To heat the ice from -20 degrees Celsius and convert it into liquid water requires an energy input comparable to detonating millions of nuclear weapons simultaneously. Yet the seismographs stationed across Antarctica detected no earthquake, no shock wave traveled through the crust, no explosive force was recorded. Instead, the ice appeared to melt without any physical impact. That suggests a technology capable of transferring enormous energy into matter without creating the destructive side effects normally associated with explosions or impacts. Somehow, the ice was heated without pushing against the surrounding environment. Meanwhile, the ocean itself has begun reacting to the sudden influx of heat. Buoy sensors scattered throughout the Southern Ocean are reporting dramatic temperature changes. In the Weddell Gyre, water temperatures have risen by nearly 12 degrees Fahrenheit in only 6 hours. Introducing that much heat into the coldest ocean on Earth is like detonating a thermal bomb beneath the surface, and when the oceans change temperature suddenly, the consequences can spread across the entire planet. Because the cold waters around Antarctica drive the massive ocean current system that regulates Earth's climate. Disrupt that engine, and the global balance of temperatures begins to shift. But as researchers continued examining the satellite feeds, something even stranger happened. At exactly 4:27 UTC, the object known as 3I Atlas moved. For nearly 3 months, the mysterious object known as 3I Atlas had remained in a stable high orbit around Earth. Its position barely changed, and astronomers believed it was simply another unusual interstellar visitor passing through the solar system. But the moment the Antarctic melt event occurred, that assumption began to collapse. At 4:27 UTC, only 12 minutes after the energy burst struck the ice shelf, tracking stations recorded a sudden change. The object dropped its altitude by nearly 4,000 kilometers in less than a second. That kind of maneuver should be impossible. Objects moving in orbit obey strict rules of physics. To change altitude that quickly would normally require an enormous amount of propulsion energy, yet no propulsion plume was detected, and no energy signature suggested the use of conventional engines. Instead, the object simply moved closer to Earth, as if gravity itself had briefly changed its mind. What makes this movement even more unsettling is where the object positioned itself. After descending, it stabilized directly above the melt zone in Antarctica. It moved closer to the massive body of water that had just been created, almost as if it were observing the result of its own action. When scientists began analyzing the sunlight reflecting off the newly formed ocean surface, they noticed something unusual. Spectrometers on the Sentinel-6 satellite detected a faint ultraviolet fluorescence coming from the water. Ordinary seawater does not glow in the ultraviolet spectrum. That observation suggests the energy beam that struck the ice did more than simply melt it. The pulse appears to have carried something with it. Some form of additional signal or material may have been embedded in the water itself. Several possibilities are now being considered. It could be a chemical marker, it could be a biological agent, or, in a more unsettling scenario, it could involve microscopic machines or particles designed to interact with the ocean environment. Whatever the explanation, the result is now spreading across the Atlantic Ocean. The newly created water mass, nearly 50,000 cubic kilometers of it, is beginning to move northward. Ocean current simulations show that the flow is unusually fast. In fact, according to fluid dynamics models developed at MIT, the viscosity and surface tension of this water appear to be slightly different from normal seawater. That may sound like a small detail, but in fluid physics, small differences can produce enormous consequences. The models suggest that this new water mass is moving against the Antarctic circumpolar current instead of being carried by it. In other words, the water is pushing against one of the strongest ocean currents on Earth, and it is winning. If that flow continues, it will eventually reach the Atlantic meridional overturning circulation, the massive ocean conveyor belt that controls climate patterns across the planet. That circulation includes the Gulf Stream, the current responsible for carrying warm tropical water toward Europe and regulating temperatures across the northern hemisphere. If a massive pulse of altered water enters that system, the balance could collapse. Some models predict that the Gulf Stream could weaken dramatically within 48 hours of the water's arrival. If that happens, Europe could experience sudden and severe cooling while equatorial regions grow hotter. But while scientists were still trying to understand the implications of the Antarctic melt event, another development changed the situation completely. Because at 12:42 UTC, seismographs deep inside the Earth detected something even more unexpected. A signal originating not from space but from the planet's core itself. At 12:42 UTC, something happened that forced scientists to rethink everything they believed about the event. Until that moment, the working assumption was simple. The energy that melted the Antarctic ice had come entirely from space. The mysterious object, 3I Atlas, had fired a directed beam toward the ice shelf, triggering the sudden liquefaction. The theory matched the satellite observations and the thermal readings. But the instruments buried deep inside Earth told a different story. Seismographs maintained by the United States Geological Survey in Albuquerque detected a coherent P-wave signal traveling upward through the planet. Normally, Seismic waves originate from earthquakes in the crust or upper mantle. This signal was different. The data indicated that it began much deeper within the outer core itself. Even more striking was the location of the signal's origin. When researchers traced the wave back to its source, the coordinates aligned perfectly with the Antarctic melt zone. In other words, the planet had responded. Scientists describe this phenomenon as resonance. A simple way to imagine it is with tuning forks. If one tuning fork vibrates at a specific frequency, another tuning fork across the room tuned to the same frequency will begin vibrating as well. Something similar appears to have occurred here. According to the data collected by multiple monitoring stations, the energy pulse from 3I Atlas struck the Antarctic ice at a frequency of 88 Hz. Exactly 8 hours later, the Earth's core responded at that same frequency. 88 Hz. That coincidence is difficult to ignore. But what truly captured the attention of researchers was the structure of the signal. The vibrations weren't random seismic noise. They formed a repeating pattern. 3 short pulses, followed by 3 longer pulses, then 3 short pulses again. The sequence repeated several times. When analysts converted the waveform into binary, the pattern appeared as 10110101. Interpreted numerically, the sequence corresponds to the number 565. At first glance, the number meant nothing. But when scientists compared it with atomic data tables, something interesting emerged. The numbers correspond to the atomic signatures of boron and carbon. That discovery raised an unexpected connection. Just days earlier, spectroscopic observations from the James Webb Space Telescope had revealed exotic carbon structures covering portions of the surface of 3I Atlas. If the object contains unusual carbon compounds and the Earth's core responded with a signal representing boron and carbon, then one possibility emerges. The interaction between the object and our planet may not be accidental. It could be a form of synchronization. In other words, the energy burst directed at Antarctica may not have been an attack. It may have been a signal. And the Earth answered. But the consequences of that interaction are already visible. Since the signal was detected, instruments measuring the planet's magnetic field have begun reporting unusual changes near the South Pole. Magnetometers show that the magnetic field strength in that region has weakened by nearly 4% in only a few hours. Ships traveling through the Southern Ocean have reported compasses spinning unpredictably. At the same time, auroras normally confined to polar skies have appeared in broad daylight over parts of New Zealand. If the Earth's core is entering a state of magnetic instability, the implications could extend far beyond melting ice, because magnetic fields protect our planet from radiation. And when that protection weakens, the effects can spread quickly across the entire globe. To understand why scientists are alarmed by these measurements, it helps to look back at Earth's geological history. Our planet's magnetic field has not always been stable. Over tens of thousands of years, the magnetic poles occasionally wander, weaken, and even reverse entirely. One of the most famous examples occurred about 42,000 years ago during what geophysicists call the Laschamp event. During that period, the magnetic field weakened dramatically and shifted position. The change allowed far more cosmic radiation to reach the surface of the planet. Evidence from ice cores and geological samples suggests that the event disrupted ecosystems around the world. Some researchers believe it contributed to widespread extinctions and severe climate instability. Now, scientists are asking a troubling question. Could the interaction with 3I Atlas be triggering something similar? Satellite data from the European Space Agency's Swarm constellation shows that magnetic field lines beneath Antarctica are behaving strangely. Instead of flowing smoothly through the planet's magnetic system, they appear tangled and compressed. In physics, when magnetic field lines twist and snap, they release enormous amounts of energy. The same mechanism drives solar flares on the surface of the Sunday. If such a magnetic reconnection event occurred within Earth's core, the consequences could be severe. A sudden electromagnetic surge could propagate through the planet's magnetosphere and outward into space. Satellites orbiting Earth could be disabled. Power grids across entire continents might collapse. Navigation systems, communications networks, and electrical infrastructure could all be affected simultaneously. And during all of this, 3I Atlas has not moved away. At 13 UTC, tracking stations noticed the object shift position once again. This time, it adjusted its orbit until it aligned almost perfectly with the magnetic South Pole. That maneuver suggests a new possibility. Instead of simply observing the magnetic disturbance, the object may be positioning itself to collect the energy that could be released. Some scientists have begun comparing the situation to a parasite attaching itself to a host. The host in this case would be our planet. The initial melting of the Antarctic ice might not have been the main event. Instead, it could have been a way to trigger deeper planetary processes. And the signs of that deeper reaction are becoming harder to ignore. Compasses across the southern hemisphere continue behaving erratically. Magnetic field sensors show fluctuations growing stronger rather than stabilizing. Meanwhile, the massive body of superheated water created earlier in the day continues moving northward through the Atlantic Ocean. Satellite tracking shows the glowing plume crossing the 60th parallel. Within 48 hours, it will intersect the Gulf Stream. If that interaction destabilizes the Atlantic circulation system, climate patterns across the planet could begin changing rapidly. But even as scientists monitor the ocean and the magnetic field, another mystery remains unresolved. Why did the signal from 3I Atlas suddenly stop? Because at exactly 13:15 UTC, 33 minutes after the Earth's core responded, every detectable transmission from the object ceased. At 13:15 UTC, the data streams monitoring 3I Atlas changed abruptly. The directed energy emissions disappeared. The thermal anomaly above Antarctica faded. Magnetic disturbances temporarily stabilized. For a moment, it seemed as if the entire sequence of events had simply ended. But that silence raises the most important question of all. Why did the signal stop? There are several possible explanations, and each leads to a very different future. One possibility is that the interaction between the object and the Earth was successful. If the event in Antarctica was meant to synchronize some unknown process between the object and the planet, then the silence could mean the connection is complete. In that scenario, whatever system 3I Atlas was activating may now be operating on its own. Another possibility is far less dramatic. Perhaps the object simply completed a form of resource extraction. If the mass anomaly detected in Antarctica represents matter converted into energy, then the event could have been nothing more than a refueling stop for a passing interstellar traveler. In that case, the object might soon leave Earth's orbit, and the planet would simply be left to deal with the consequences: higher sea levels, altered ocean currents, and a temporary disturbance in the magnetic field. Human civilization would survive, but there is a third possibility, and that one worries scientists the most. It is possible the signal stopped because the object is waiting for a response. If the Antarctic event was intended as a demonstration of capability, it may have been a message that says, in effect, look what can be done to your planet. Look how easily the polar ice can melt. Look how quickly your oceans can rise. Look how fragile your magnetic field truly is. If that is the case, then the next step may depend on how humanity reacts. Meanwhile, the physical consequences of the event continue unfolding. Sentinel-6 satellites are tracking the unusual water mass as it moves through the Atlantic. The glowing plume has already crossed into northern currents and is approaching the Gulf Stream. Oceanographers estimate that the collision between this heated water and the Atlantic circulation could occur within 48 hours. At the same time, telescopes and radar arrays continue monitoring the mysterious object itself. At 14 UTC, 3I Atlas performed another slow rotation, but this time it did something that immediately caught the attention of astronomers. It turned away from Antarctica. Its primary face is no longer pointed toward the South Pole. Instead, the object is now aligned with the opposite side of the planet, the Arctic. If the same process that melted the Antarctic ice were repeated over the Greenland ice sheet, the consequences would be far more severe. Instead of a 6-inch rise in sea levels, models suggest the oceans could surge by 20 feet. Cities like Miami would disappear beneath the water. Coastal regions around the world would be transformed within days. For now, scientists continue watching the instruments and analyzing the data streams. The glowing water is moving north. The magnetic field remains unstable, and the mysterious object that started it all has just shifted its focus toward the Arctic. Whatever happens next may unfold within the next 48 hours. If you want to stay informed about developments like this and understand the science behind them, make sure you subscribe to the channel, turn on notifications, and share this video so more people can follow the story as it unfolds.